The views and opinions expressed during this program are entirely those of the show's hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of Rude Rangers Entertainment, its investors, management, advertisers, or staff.
Hey, how you doing, everybody? I'm the Dr. Bob Lee from 107.5 WPLS and the Make the Grade Foundation for Education. You're watching Rude Rangers TV.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Acupuncture is My Life, whereas today's discussion will surround two emotions that are considered moral emotions and heavily weigh on morality. You see, the role of emotions that are considered moral emotions tend to provide a person with a sense of attitude which is reflexive. That being an attitude in which a person tends to have toward themselves as a person. Now, are you wondering which two emotions I'm referencing right now? I'll tell you right after this commercial break.
Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life.
Now, I hope you guys have downloaded the Acupuncture is My Life app so that if you have any questions regarding any of the episodes on the Acupuncture is My Life channel, you can simply message us and we'll be glad to answer them. Now, the two emotions in which I'm referencing are guilt and shame. Now, when it comes to guilt, which is a very dark emotion, guilt tends to be heavily tied to a very negative sense of self. You see, with guilt, an acupuncturist tends to notice that this emotion can present in several ways, such as, let's say, a feeling of responsibility for something negative relative to circumstances that have affected that person or maybe even someone else. It can also present as a feeling of regret for imagined or even real misdeeds which may have recently occurred or has occurred sometime in the past that you just can't let go of. You see, guilt can even present in a sense of feeling responsible or guilty for something negative that may have happened to a friend or even a family member, or even taking responsibility for someone else's problems. You see, harboring a feeling of guilt more times than not leads us on a path of making bad decisions in life. You see, to an acupuncturist, guilt tends to cause a person's chi to stagnate, and for the most part tends to affect any organ in the body with a focus, I would more so say, on the lungs, liver, heart, and even the kidneys. Now, when it comes to shame, shame tends to be tied to a sense of worthlessness. It's more or less the opposite of the emotion pride. Now, shame can serve as a cause for disease in the sense that when it becomes severe, it tends to cause a person to become extremely defensive and impotent. You see, someone who suffers from shame tends to constantly feel as if they've done something wrong and want to hide themselves. You see, shame is more so tied, let's say, to an individual's place in society, as being concerned as to what people may think of them as someone to be frowned upon. The interesting reality between these two emotions is that when it comes to guilt, we tend to hear voices of self-condemnation, whereas when it comes to shame, we tend to see people condemning us. By saying this, I'm saying shame can be avoided if we're not seen doing something wrong, whereas with guilt, it tends to be unremitting. We cannot avoid it whether someone sees us or not because of that inner voice within us that is judging us. Now, an acupuncturist is aware that shame tends to make a person's chi sink, And the sinking of this chi is usually accompanied by internal dampness. So if you ever experience issues with emotions such as guilt and shame, see an acupuncturist. And we'll be right back right after this commercial break.
Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life.
And welcome back to Acupuncture is My Life. Now, I hope during the commercial break you downloaded the app so you can ask questions anytime you want, any episode, and we'll get back to you. We'll definitely answer your questions. Now, back to the topic of guilt and shame. And as an acupuncturist, guilt is an emotion that in excess can affect the heart and the kidneys. And shame is an emotion that in excess can affect the spleen and the heart. And we'll delve deeper into that in 1 second. I first want to welcome my group, Jackie, Centrella, and Dr. Ada. Now, Dr. Ada is a psychotherapist, and I'm going to start out with her because this has a lot to do with emotions and everything that we've been going through over the past, I would say, close to 2 years. 2 years, which is quite some time. And many individuals have been severely impacted by a series of emotions that we'll discuss in other episodes. But this one is more so focused on guilt and shame. But I'm going to start with guilt. Now, Dr. Ada, as a licensed professional psychotherapist, okay, how do you define guilt? Now I know. This is sort of like a, I want to say, an umbrella emotion. Why? Because it's a many. I mean, its definition is like really broad. I know that. I understand that, and it's a very dark emotion. Okay, so I'll at least go with that. But go ahead. How would you define emotion?
Good morning, everyone, and I thank all my group here, especially Dr. Leroy, for having me here. But one of the things that we've been trying to do is try to get to the core of these negative emotions so that we could live an emotional stable life or a happier life. We cannot make you better. But guilt is a negative emotion, like you have said, and it feels like, quote unquote, that you have done something wrong, that you perceived wrong. There is a difference because you don't necessarily have to have done something wrong, but you perceive it as wrong. So you feel guilty about doing that. And one of the explanations that you gave and how it affects our body biologically really has to do with the approach that we use in psychotherapy, which is the biopsychosocial approach. The biology of these negative emotions affect our organs. You specifically said guilt is affecting the heart and the kidneys. Right. So we'll have to be careful because if we don't express these feelings and these negative emotions, we're going to keep it inside and it's going to affect our body biologically. Right. And it also affects our psychic because we internalize it in a bad way. Yes. And when we keep it inside, it's like a jar that is all kept in the jar and it's all tied up and you keep it there. And it's like you throw it out in the sea and it's out in the sea. So psychotherapy, what we'll do is try to help you to get to the sea, go down the sea, get that jar and open it up and see what are those feelings that you feel guilty about.
Right. You know, the interesting part of guilt is how it's internalized. Internalized is it's interesting you used a jar as an example. Mm-hmm. Now, guilt is an emotion that's hard to escape because it's that little voice that's inside of us that fosters self-condemnation. You know, it constantly reminds us to be guilty or feel guilty. That's why it's so dark. Whereas the difference between guilt and shame is relative to being seen, okay? And you always want to hide. So as long as you can hide and you cannot be seen, you can escape. Shame is an emotion, whereas guilt, it follows you because that voice is in your head. And you know, over these past close to 2 years, many individuals have been internalizing these emotions to levels where it serves as a cause of disease. You know, it's gotten that bad, and there hasn't been too many outlets out there in the way of like sort of shedding or opening up to sort of release, you know. And this is why I'm glad, you know, I have my partner Jackie here to talk about it, you know, from a general perspective, and Centrella to discuss this, you know, and how exercise and yoga can help, and you as a psychotherapist. But now I'm going to go to Jackie. Like, what's your take on guilt as an emotion, and how have you noticed this emotion affecting those around you over the past close to 2 years?
I mean, I really like that jar analogy, because I feel like guilt is something that you bottle up and you can throw it in the sea, or you can carry it in your purse, and it's always with you. It's just there until you address it. So I have it. You know, I have guilt from things that I've done in my past that I have not unjarred fully yet. But I think in the past couple of years, the guilt of people, you know, whether it's survivor's guilt or I have a job, why doesn't my neighbor, you know, all the different things that aren't really your fault. I think people are putting this guilt upon themselves. Maybe they don't even need to.
Right.
But we're also confused as to how to feel because of what has happened to us at the beginning of 2020. Why do we put this guilt on ourselves that really isn't warranted? You know, when you really think about it, I can't control the fact that my neighbor passed away or lost their job due to the pandemic, and I still had a job. How do we unpack that?
Yeah, it's interesting that you put it that way, Jackie, and I love the way you expressed it, because one of the things that we do really in psychotherapy is try to really untie that jar and find out. One of the ways in which we do that, because we have many tools, is trying to replace those negative feelings that you have. We are basically replacing those intrusive thoughts that we have, and we all have them. You know, why is my neighbor dying? Why do I have a job? You have to really think about how to replace that negative thinking for a more positive one, and try to see that it's not really your fault that they don't have it, that you don't have control over those things. Those things happen, and you have to manage your own self to see if you could live a stable emotional life.
That's interesting, but let me ask you, like, what would you feel, I'm sorry, people around you, just in general, have felt guilty about over this past period, let's say 2 years?
I mean, you know, just because I went to work fairly quickly. I went back to work in June of 2020, so
Right.
I've been around people. It's almost like I've been watching the world go by me and taking in all this information from, you know, if I have 8 to 10 people in my chair, I get 8 to 10 different, you know, thoughts about what's been going on. And a lot of it is either guilt from their children. I wish that I could have controlled the way my kids experience school. My daughter, son are very depressed. I feel so bad about that. I wish I could help them more. All these uncontrollable pieces of guilt that people are starting to put in a jar, and I could really only just listen, but you know, it's so much at once. That is what's so bizarre about the last 2 years, is it's all at once for all of us. And you know, a lot of people realize that they could not control the way their child experienced school, and they're not guilty about it. They're just helping the child along. But a lot of parents are holding guilt for something that they could not control.
Yeah. But now I have to ask Centrella, when it comes to this emotion, that being guilt. Now, being a certified fitness trainer and a certified yoga instructor. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. Sometimes everyone's got all these alphabets attached to them. I love that though. That's so awesome. Like, how do you, in dealing with your clients, have you noticed any of them like trying to get back into it or whatever, expressing guilt as an emotion for not exercising? How do you think exercise can benefit someone, overwhelmed with guilt as an emotion?
I just think that what happens with exercise, it just takes a place in the moment, right? So what you're hoping is it creates a new pattern in the brain.
But isn't it sort of like a release mechanism?
Absolutely a release, but that's the point, right? So in that moment of when you feel this way normally, what will your patterns normally be? Mm-hmm. To dive deeper, to create a whole scenario where it ends worse than it last time, to continuate it, right? To allow that emotion of shame or guilt to continue because you feel like you have done something to where you should feel this. And you're going to decide how much torture you allow yourself to have. When you start to exercise, you start to release endorphins, and then you don't feel exactly the same. So the point is to hope that you cling onto the patterns that are forming from exercising opposed to the ones that you force yourself to normally deal with on your own.
But that triggers like a form of addiction, though, wouldn't it? Because you're getting like this sort of like this natural high.
Well, let me tell you something. If that's the case, I don't think exercise would be a drug that people will have a problem being addicted to, because I think it has a way to, it's just like life. It has ebb and flows, so you don't always feel amazing. You don't always want to work out. You don't always do the same workout. Maybe that you do other workouts for different reasons, but you notice that when you do yoga, you feel better, or when you take a walk, you feel better.
Well, wouldn't you say some of your clients, when I reference like this self-high as sort of like a drug, right? Wouldn't you say like some of your clients, let's say when they begin to feel overwhelmed with this emotion again, they'll seek out potentially exercise or yoga? Do they ever talk to you about feeling guilty?
Well, I think the thing they feel guilty about the most is not working out. So we don't really get past
now look at
that.
So with that being the case, looking at the past, let's say 18 months, do you feel that guilt sort of, in that aspect, became overwhelming to some individuals? Whereas,
yeah, I think it was more guilt on the emphasis of what you would have done had you known this was coming.
Right.
So the days when you could get up and go work out and you chose to stay in the bed, now you feel guilty about that because you're like, wow, look how I just misused all the time I had. But that doesn't serve you, right? So who the hell cares? And if it was open and if this happened and then we go back into the gym this year, you may not go again then. So that doesn't solve the problem, right? So if we see that the pattern here is guilt and shame and being unable to meet small goals or set small goals and meet them for yourself, then we need to figure out why. What's the part that makes you say, these are all the things you need to do, but you don't want to do but 3 of them?
Well, what do you try and tell your clients to sort of motivate?
I just tell them to be patient with themselves. Can you just give yourself a little space? Just in this moment to just do this one thing, and it doesn't even have to have a definition today. Let's just do it for a while and then reassess it. That way maybe there's no guilt or there's no anxiety about what if I don't do it right, or what if it hurts, or what if I'm exhausted, or what if it doesn't change and then I've done this. And then
when people start taking time limits off, because you've been doing this forever and people go, in 6 months by Christmas I'm gonna have lost 25 pounds, and that is exhausting alone.
I feel like as soon as you tell me you want something by Christmas, then that to me says that now you want to present an aspect of yourself that isn't usually who you are the rest of the year.
Wow.
And then you're going to be doing it with people you think you have to do this for. Yeah. And I don't know if that part is true, but I do know that it's not good that you have to become someone else because other people are coming.
And I think that Cintrella and all of us have been talking about the importance of really looking within, because then you have this expectation that by Christmas you have to lose certain number of pounds. But is that a reachable goal? Is that something that you could really do? So you have to ask yourself, because our behavior is really a good percentage of the time unconscious. You don't really know. When you become conscious, then you know. The question becomes, what can I do? That it could be a reachable goal, that you could have objectives, one step at a time, 1, 2, 3, write them down, and you know that you could do them. But when I'm going to be doing this, and then you don't do it, you're going to feel more guilt because you don't do it. That's the whole thing.
Serving as a precursor to guilt then? Like, because if you don't meet your goals and objectives, then there's a sense of guilt.
But we could, yes, the sense of guilt, because you're setting yourself up for failure kind of thing, because you're trying to expect something that you cannot really do.
Right,
so that's the importance. Yes.
You're not disciplined
So
in that area.
The importance is to define a reasonable goal that you could do by steps, and then it'll become attainable. It could be something that you could do, and then you'll feel good about it. And not the guilt. Yes. And then important, because it's connected to acupuncture, the pathways and the neurons. You're sending messages to the neuron to do something different, and that's why you change your habit, and now you're not feeling guilty anymore. You don't feel depressed because your brain has taken a new pathway.
So it really is more of a lifestyle change rather than just a short-term goal. I'm gonna work out hard. I'm gonna cut my calories for 6 months. And the smarter thing to do is the lifestyle change for the neurons to.
You definitely need to change the neurons. It's all about that. It's all about change. I tell you, I suffer with that right now. I just had, this tremendous amount of guilt because there was something I was supposed to get ready for. And I realized for me that goal setting, one goal at a time, works best for me, because normally I try to do 6 or 7 and it becomes very overwhelming and something always suffers. But even in doing that, I feel like there's a goal coming up that I have not put my all in. And then I started to beat myself up about it. And I was like, right, but when we do that, where does that go? Right? So that sets me further back. So now the goal that I had that was still attainable, I've allowed myself to block myself with my own thoughts, my own actions of saying you should have done it, but you didn't do it. And now you feel bad. And now you feel guilty. And then you create so much guilt and feeling bad that you become a little bit paralyzed in that moment and nothing happens. And if you keep doing that, you're like, am I losing it? Like, why do I keep doing this? This doesn't make any sense. So there has to be a real moment of you starting to try to say, okay, well, what was I doing when I was able to stay on focus with my goals? Or what did I do when I realized when I was done, I felt better for doing?
When you were getting ready for whatever you thought you weren't prepared for, and you're beating yourself up. So every day, let's say you have this thing in 2 days from now. Is everyone outside seeing her feel that way? Like, I would never have known if she didn't mention it, that she was beating herself up for 3 weeks. I would never have known. So it's totally her jar, right? It's not anything we'd ever have known and seen. So what does that make about guilt? It really is just yours. It's not.
It's a definite learned behavior. People use, because think about it. People use guilt and shame to manipulate you. You don't want to be shamed, so therefore you shouldn't do this because you'll be ashamed of yourself. And if you don't do what I'm saying you should do, then you feel guilty. And it becomes a way of getting for someone to get what they want out of you. And then later you use those same tactics on yourself, not realizing.
Nice, because that's
it's the same thing. It's just that the same tactics that were used on you use them on yourself.
Just like she was on you, right? How many people are walking around holding in this guilt? Like Jackie expressed, like I just wasn't underwear 3 weeks. You felt this way or whatever the case may be. Because as a hairstylist, I'm sure the time that you spend with some of your clients, sometimes they'll come out and speak on it. And it's not like Jackie's a psychotherapist or psychologist, but I'm
not, but I feel like
many,
I kind of have, I get to touch people therapeutically as well as physically.
Yes, and that's an okay thing. The difference is that it's not therapeutic. You're serving a support system for your client, and it helps temporarily. Yeah. But they're gonna go right back to do the same thing. Yeah. And that's the part that somehow we're trying to educate our audience to see that really seeking professional help does help. And I think that Cintrella and Jackie are touching on so many, and Dr. Leroy on so many good points, that once your brain thinks that you could do several tasks at the same time, it doesn't work. Become one. You start one and then you stop. You start one and then you stop. And then none of them gets done. You have to do one at a time because your brain cannot do simultaneous tasks. It's a wrong perception that we have, that we could multitask.
But would you disagree with what Jackie said? Like, sometimes they'll go home and then they'll repeat what they were doing. But then the repetitive aspect of them coming to see Jackie, and I'm using Jackie as an example, after a while, wouldn't it click? Wouldn't it sort of say there should be change?
We hope. This is like the therapist's fantasy, that the person will actually reach that point where they say, okay, now I cannot do it myself, or my hairstyle, it's only going to make me feel pretty on the outside, but I'm still hurting inside and I'm still feeling this way, and I have to reach deeper to see what's going on and to find out, because each individual is different. You know, for some people it will be something that happened. Cintrella and Jackie talked about how we are growing up. Either you're praised for something that you do as a child, because now we're young adults and we're adults, and you're bad. So you're internalizing that there's nothing that is wrong with you, personally wrong with who you are, and then it's really,
because there's nothing wrong with us when we're little kids, when we're toddlers.
All right, Tim, I want to stop y'all here. Take a commercial break, and when we come back, we'll jump into shame. I like what you guys started touching on.
Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life.
Hey guys, welcome back. Now that we've touched on guilt as an emotion, and when it's severe, it can cause chi to stagnate in the body and create a myriad of disorders, I want to touch on shame. Why? Because over this past 2 years, this is another emotion that has come to overwhelm us, affect us in a way where it causes disorders that I've been treating a lot as an acupuncturist, because shame causes chi to sort of sink, go down, and you just feel gloomy. It gives you this feeling of self-worthlessness. And when chi sinks, your spirit, your energy, everything just goes with it, and it gives you this internal damp type of feeling. And acupuncture is great for treating all of these disorders, but I love also being in a group setting with Jackie and Cintrella and Dr. Ada to discuss this, more so from a layman's perspective. And I want to get into shame at this point, because both Dr. Ada and Jackie began discussing, as a child, how it presents, how it develops, how it comes about. And more times than not, it does start there. Because it depends on how a parent, one, can raise a child, among other things, their environment as well. And if a child is being raised with a sense of worthlessness, they can grow up holding this in. And whereas when they're in their adult life, anything such as let's say a recent pandemic or anything can really bring it out. And they'll begin to express it in certain ways, and it can create all types of problems. But I want to start with you, Dr. Ada. Now, how do you, I won't say define shame, but do you encounter that with some of your clients? Speak to this audience from a general perspective with regard to shame.
All the time. Shame is internalized in a way that is not related to your own behavior, but to yourself. That there is something wrong with you. So you mentioned something about the environment in which you grow up. That is important, because if you're told as a child, remember, we're in stages of development. A child's personality is not fully developed since we're born.
Right.
Personality and temperament will remain with us all our lives, but throughout our lives is developing based on what we see, what we hear. So if you're told that you're not good, guess what? You're going to believe that you're not good. So a sense of not being worth living starts to create that negative image about yourself. And that has a lot to do with how people engage in unhealthy relationships, how unhealthy needs become sort of like a feeding each other kind of thing.
You can also make bad decisions based off of this emotion, like the types of jobs you choose, the types of partners you marry, things of that nature.
Exactly, because it's self-harm. Now you feel shame about yourself and you end up doing things that are harming you. And the question is like, why are you with that person if that person is abusing you physically, emotionally, and verbally? Why are you with that person? So it's not only until you start questioning yourself and trying to find answers for yourself that you start to detaching from that unhealthy behavior.
Well, let me ask you this, Jackie. Like, how have you noticed or seen or would you want to express shame from what you saw these past few months? Even with your clients, friends, family, associates.
I mean, I think I've been hearing a lot, you know, I've been seeing a lot of friends of mine who are my age. They all, most of them have children or, and they're just living their lives, but a lot of them are starting to look at themselves physically. So now I've been in these conversations, and I experienced the pandemic so differently. I feel like I just put all the baggage down and I don't care anymore. I don't really care. I will eat when I want and I won't, and I'll work out when I want and I won't. I'm not gonna really force myself to feel a certain way about my body anymore. A lot of my friends that are my age are turning it up and starting to talk about getting work done, getting their face done. I don't know, it's this crazy thing that's a conversation now that I have no interest in. So I just listen and I yes them to death. And they try to get me in on it. Well, you should go see the doctor too, because maybe you can get a little mommy makeover. And I'm like, I don't care anymore.
You should be like, you know, that's interesting, but then maybe you should suggest what you would do. And that's not to put down surgery, but the point is there has to be a reason why you think you need to surgery. And I think that's the part you should discover before making the decision. Maybe it will be good for you, but maybe it won't.
But why so much now?
I think it's just because we've been told that we are supposed to stay 25 forever. Right. And that somehow if you don't, because none of us do, but for some reason we start to allow society's depiction on what women should look like.
And I think,
and who started this? Like, I don't even know.
People are really.
Well, it's just so much more accessible. It's so much more accessible, and you don't have to grow. You don't have to challenge yourself. You don't have to evolve. You can ignore, deflect, and change your outside appearance.
Now, when you say, I'm sorry, Dr. Ada, when you say that, change your outside appearance, like how would you correlate that, let's say, with exercise and yoga? Now, do people approach you as clients with a sense of shame and they want to evolve? Now, when you use evolve as a term, I sort of went a little to the right, like to say, okay, why wouldn't or shouldn't they want to evolve? And use shame as a positive as far as like when it comes to exercise?
I don't think shame has any place, positive or negative.
Okay.
Because just that it gives you a positive, you know, if you're positive, I don't understand in what way.
Well, I got to refute you. I have to refute you on that. Why? Because the laws of polarity. You don't have existence without polarity. You need a positive and negative, and it's how you use the negative to become a positive. That's just me. That's just me.
I hear what you're saying.
Because sometimes when let's say if I felt shame,
I got a way.
Okay.
I have a way.
Shoot.
So for example, I love a challenge. Like that's my jam. Like I'm always gonna do fitness challenges throughout the year. But people think, oh, that makes, because you're such a beast, you're so amazing. No, it's really because that's how I hold myself accountable. I hold myself accountable by setting up these challenges. And when I do them, I also have something stored up. I have tools now to remember. Oh, remember you just did that 60-day challenge. You didn't think you could do that and you did. Now look. So it's the same thing with negative, right? So if I don't do anything to change my current situation, then I just repeat my patterns because that's what I've always done. There's nothing showed me anything different. So I can't try to get into a different response until I do something completely different.
So you utilize, let's say, these challenges, exercise, to sort of not so much in the sense of suppress this negative emotion called shame, but to sort of eradicate it or attempt to eradicate it.
Yeah, because it's body shame is one of the biggest ones, right? That's our biggest thing is body shame. And I feel like if we only knew that the biggest judge was ourselves, even though that has been based on other people's opinions and what they say about us, we still co-signed. We still said, yep, I agree. My body is garbage. I look like crap. I'm no good. I never keep my word. So we have to co-sign, sign up every day to repeat these things several times a day until we believe them. And then once we start to believe them, then now we're at a point of how hard will it be to unbelieve them.
Well, my question for the doctor is, people like us, I think Central and I are a little bit different breeds of people where we constantly have to take on things to achieve, to eradicate shame and feel good. And it's tools that we give ourselves. But how much is too much? I feel like sometimes I put a little too much on my plate week to week where I can't catch up on regrouping myself anymore. I've done so much to achieve so much. When does it end?
Yeah,
You know?
I think it's such a good question because it really has to do with the fact that the social portion of our being right now, our existence right now, demands that we have a certain look. It's okay to go ahead and have a tummy tuck or have breast implants and look a certain way. We do not have to if we really feel good about ourselves. Like you said, I don't feel like doing that.
Yeah.
There are people who don't feel good about themselves and they feel shame about the way they look. So they have to go out and do something else.
So are we up and past feeling like we care, or are we so disconnected from feeling like we care? Am I disconnected or am I past it? Have I elevated above that?
I think it's disconnection.
Disconnection.
I don't think you're past it. Yes.
Yeah, there's no such thing as getting past it. Yeah.
It's an important word in psychotherapy that you have to be connected and how you feel. You could be 52 and feel okay with the way you look. There are people who are 60 and they feel okay with the way they look. So you don't have to go out of that. So you don't have to go out of that mode to feel a certain way, to look a certain way, to fit it into what society's expectations are. You have to feel good with yourself so you're not ashamed of your body anymore, and that you feel good with the way you look and the way you are.
What is that mechanism that allows for you to feel good about yourself?
Surrendering.
Because a lot of times, like many people who say, and I've even heard that as part of this discussion, is you have to feel. But then you have an audience that's wondering, well, what's going to trigger me to have to feel?
Well, you feel regardless. So it's a matter of like, okay, say for example, okay, when you do something, okay, later in today I'll be doing yoga. So after they do, there's certain postures that we'll do, and then we'll just sit there and feel it because certain postures bring up certain emotions. But we're so used to hiding from them, saying, oh, I think that's what it was, but it wasn't, and then just cracking a joke so they don't have to stay in that space. But if you learn to stay in this space, the good and the bad, there's something to be learned in that. And sometimes you may realize that it's kind of bullshit. I don't even know if I really believe this. I think I've just been doing it because it seemed like the right thing to do. Sometimes space in the problem is a great thing.
Now, Dr. Ada, the key word that she used was hide. You heard it, right, Jackie? She used the word hide.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the difference between guilt and shame. See, with shame, you can hide because you're being judged by people, by an audience, and you can hide. But guilt, which is unremitting, it's that inner voice that makes you feel guilty, so you can't hide.
Can't hide, and you have to start facing yourself. That big word in psychotherapy is awareness. You have to be aware at some point of your life that this cannot be masked anymore, and that you have to face it. So you have to be.
You recommend counseling, you recommend exercise, and having someone to talk to, of course, as well as acupuncture, but you recommend like reaching out, just opening up and be accepting of, you know, different modes of, what would you call it?
Things that will help you to feel happier. Like I said before, and it's like a circle. I cannot make you better because you're a good person. Choose the people who are around you, positive people.
Reduce your own suffering.
Choose the people whose eyes light up
Like
when they see you.
Yeah, you're saying, you're learning, you're teaching yourself to reduce your own suffering. You suffer when you are riddled with guilt.
That don't have that inner strength.
No, that's not about inner strength. I'm just saying one thing at a time. It was, you know what, last Tuesday, I really enjoyed my conversation with blank. Maybe I should try to do that again. You know what, when I walked outside, I did feel better. But that comes from being aware. That's even in the moments where you're not that comfortable with being aware, because it's uncomfortable, it hurts.
Don't you feel like guilty and shameful people just are so uncomfortable being aware? I feel like people I know that carry so much guilt and shame.
You're aware that it's happening. Right.
So there is awareness no matter what.
Not acknowledging your awareness, right? So you're saying, I'm aware enough to change this emotion, to go behind the pattern and say, okay, this is where I start to feel shame. And what do I do when I feel shame? Do I crack jokes? Do I start to put myself down out loud? Do I deflect? Do I start to be mean to other people? Like, it's really important to know what these feelings are making you do. You're not hiding them as well as you think. It's a matter of other people are letting you know what they see. Someone sees it.
Yeah.
And you do too if you just open your eyes and just stop just putting it on autopilot.
It's important to go get help.
It is so important to get help and to have a counsel. You know, just like you need a therapist, you need a trainer, you need acupuncture, you do need a good hairstylist. Like, these are all things you need in your life. And you get to choose.
Yes.
Like, you get to choose these people. You get to choose the people who are going to help you, right? You couldn't choose the people who possibly put this pain upon you, but you get to choose now who's going to help me get to the me version that I love the most. Who's going to help me get to that version, you know? And there's people out there. And when you start putting yourself that way, all you have to do is start to want. And even if your want doesn't change into a do until another year, it started the day you wanted it. And be okay with that.
Wow.
Just let some of these things go. I think that we just hold on to way too much.
Too much. And we all have choices. You have the choice to really change that or keep it that way and continue suffering and continue to be guilty about things that you do and continue to be shameful about the way you look. So you make a choice to modify that, because modification is a form of change, and try to pick those things that will help you to get to the lifestyle that you want. Basically.
Neurons.
Yes. Change the neurons, finally.
And if you want to have an incentive, not a reason for you to feel more guilt or shame, coming from a woman, but even speaking for a man, a human in general, the way we conduct ourselves, your children are watching. Even if they never say a word, they are watching. And that is not to add extra stress, instead to give an incentive for you to be your best version of yourself. That hopefully...
Sometimes that's bad, though. What? Sometimes that is bad.
What's bad?
Attempting to be, and I've noticed this throughout, you know, these past 2 years with individuals, attempting to be the best person that you can be in light of your children, whereas you should just allow, in my opinion, no, please.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
In my opinion, and others that I've spoken with, be who you are.
Yes.
And if there are issues or problems, even when it comes to individuals' children, you know, you express to your children, you know, this is your sense of discomfort or concern or whatever the case may be. And believe it or not, children understand more than we give them credit for. 1 second. Yeah. So what happens is when your child understands that you can convey, you can communicate your personal deficiencies or your personal problems to them in attempts to talk. You're teaching, you're giving your child that added sense of character. And they're understanding that they're not perfect. So a lot of times, and I've noticed this, and this is why I'm glad you brought that up, because there are people that are watching that a lot of times they want to put forth their best side in light of the fact that they're children or kids or whoever's watching. And some individuals don't have children. So what happens is this is who I am. So if this is a trigger for me, it's a trigger, just like you have triggers.
Wait, I have to respond to that. I have to respond to that.
After you, Miss.
After you. Only because what you said, yes, I'm sorry. I think I started that wrong. Not pretending to be your best. No. Not pretending to be your best self. But going through the motion of, these are my triggers. These are things that, like, for example, on Mondays, I used to have a really bad case of the Monday blues. And I realized that it was worse when I did all these things I didn't want to do. I took appointments. I did things for people, whatever it was. But I knew on Monday, for some reason, I needed that day for myself. Yeah. So my daughter says to me, can you go to Trader Joe's for me? You said you would. I said, I believe I said Tuesday. I said, I know I didn't say Monday. And she goes, why? Well, you know why. Monday is the day that mommy needs for herself. I don't do anything I don't want to on Monday. Right. And everything on Monday is centered around mommy. Right. But that's because I'm showing her this is how I take care of my mental health. So being, right. See, not being a version of yourself that's the best version. No, not that bullshit. I'm talking about real stuff. Yeah. Like being in front of your children saying, hey, today it's hard for me, but I'm going to choose higher. This was hard for me, but I'm going to reflect. Let them see the process, because they can't just assume it all works out well and they don't see how you got there. Nice. That's definitely not what I meant. I want you to let them see the real you, the struggle. This is hard for me today.
I think that there is a big difference between show your children the best that you could possibly be and the person that you really are.
That's right.
Okay, so if you could do that to your children, I think that we have half of the battle win, because you cannot be who you're not.
That's right.
Okay, that's why actors and actresses get this big Oscar, because one of the hardest things in the world is to be who you're not. Yeah. So you're both right in essence, because you try to show your children a good portion of yourself. But when you say I cannot do it, and when you say I cannot give it to you, you're also giving them. You're also recognizing that I cannot do it. Some people call it a weakness. I think it's a strength. It's a strength.
It's such a strength.
It's such a strength, because it's showing that you're human and that there are parts that maybe you're so vulnerable that you're not able to do that. And it's okay, because you're not perfect, right? In essence, you're saying it's okay if you go ahead and do something different and you make a mistake, and it's okay, you'll try again. Mm-hmm. And then don't try to excel all the time, because that may be too much for that child to handle. So some of us will see it as a weakness. Some of us will see it as a strength. We have both weaknesses and strengths.
That's right.
Well, guys, I want to say thank you for another great episode in discussing guilt and shame. And if any of you guys out there in the audience have any questions, download the app. You see it in the commercials, and send it to Acupuncture is My Life. Message us, and we'll be glad to answer any of those questions. And I just want to say again, thank you guys for coming. And we have more to come, more fabulous episodes coming up, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life. Acupuncture is my life.
Welcome back, everyone. Now, as I'm sure by now you can understand that when emotions are in excess, it can cause disease, which is why I'm constantly saying, see an acupuncturist for regular wellness visits to avoid certain emotions running in excess. You see, one of the ways an acupuncturist can tell if guilt is the cause of a particular disorder in which you're suffering from is by pulse diagnosis. You see, this emotion can create patterns that can present as, let's say, chi and blood stagnation, whereas a person's pulse can present with a firm or wiry texture to it. Guilt can also cause the chi of a person's kidneys to sink, as I stated earlier in this episode, whereas a person's pulse would have sort of like a weak and deep texture to it, especially in the area of the pulse which represents the state of a person's kidneys. Acupuncture points I usually consider when treating this emotional disorder can be a point on a heart meridian called Heart 7, which is great for calming a person's spirit and treating blood deficiency as a result of an emotional disorder. I also consider an acupuncture point on a pericardium meridian called Pericardium 7, which is great for treating all types of mental disorders. Then there's another acupuncture point on the gallbladder meridian called Gallbladder 13, which is great for clearing the mind and quieting the spirit. Now, another acupuncture point in which I consider when treating guilt as an emotional disorder is Liver 3, which is great for treating moodiness and depression. I also consider acupuncture point Kidney 4, which is great for calming a person's Shen, along with a point on a governing vessel called Du 24, which quiets the heart and calms the spirit. Now, when it comes to shame as an emotional cause of disease, a person's pulse would tend to have sort of like a slippery, soggy texture to it. Whereas when treating this emotional disorder, I tend to consider acupuncture points Heart 7, as well as 2 acupuncture points on the spleen meridian, that being both spleen 3 and spleen 6, to lift the person's chi as well as resolve the internal dampness that has been created as a result of shame having become a cause of disease. I sometimes also consider points on a conception vessel, such as conception vessel 12 and 15, to again support the spleen as well as the heart, along with treating mental and emotional disorders. But my favorite acupuncture point of them all when it comes to treating mental and emotional disorders is Du 20 on the governing vessel, because this clears the senses and calms a person's spirit. It's an awesome point for treating mental disease, loss of memory, as well as depression. Now, you see, if you feel there's some form of guilt, maybe relative to something you've done, or you're struggling with shame as a result of a past life experience, don't be afraid to sit with an acupuncturist. We treat a wide variety of mental and emotional disorders with great success. So remember, make acupuncture a part of your life, because acupuncture is my life. What's yours?
Acupuncture is my life. 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 Acupuncture is my